children. This is Miss Gloria from New Life Church, and we're going to talk today about what is real. Now, I have a paper here with some interesting facts on it. I'm going to read these facts. They're pretty strange facts, and you have to decide if it's real or if it's made up. I'll tell you what to do if you think that it's real. Scotland's national animal is a unicorn. Touch your forehead if you think that's real. That turns out to be real. Even though unicorns are not real, it's real that Scotland's national animal is a unicorn. Okay, it turns out that the Greenland shark can live 390 years, and some of them live as long as over 500 years. Wave your hand like a flipper if you think that's real. That turns out to be real. Sharks can live an incredibly long time. Okay, here's another one. There were more trees on Earth than there are stars in our whole galaxy. Point up at the sky if you think that one's real. You know what? That's actually real. You wouldn't guess, but it's true. It turns out that there are 100, maybe 100 billion stars, maybe as many as 400 billion stars, but there are 3 trillion trees on Earth. Would you believe that? That's really crazy. Okay, here's another one. You know that lions roar and cats meow. But cheetahs are pretty big, but they don't roar. They actually meow like house cats. So you can meow, meow, if you think that's real. Well, that turns out to be real too. Cheetahs do meow. All right, here's another one. It's about knees. When people are born, they don't have any kneecap bones. Do you think that's real? Tap your knee if you think that's real. That turns out to be real. When babies are born, they don't have kneecaps. They don't get kneecaps until sometime between they're 2 and 4 years old. When I read that one, I did not even believe it. I had to go look it up somewhere and find out, but it's totally true. All right, here's another one. Clouds look all light and fluffy, but a cloud actually can weigh as much as 1,000,000 pounds. Float your hand like a cloud if you think that's real. Well, that turns out to be true. Even though clouds are so light and fluffy, you can go right through them. They're really, really big. So by the time you put all of those things together, a cloud can be 1,000,000 pounds. All right, here's another one. You know, Nintendo makes games that everybody plays. They make video games. Nintendo was founded in 1889. Pretend you're playing with a video game controller if you think that's true. Well, that turns out it's true. In 1889, they didn't have video games, but they had card games. And Nintendo, the company, actually started making card games. Okay, here's one. Tigers are stripy, and tigers have all the same stripes as each other. If you think that's true, then cover your eyes. That one's made up. Actually, tigers have all different stripes. Tiger stripes are completely different from each other, just like your fingerprints. And that's how scientists can tell which tiger they're looking at, is by looking at their stripes really carefully. All right, here's another one. It's about the brain. What is your brain made of? It turns out that your brain is 60% fat. If you think that's true, then tap your head. Yep, that's true. Your brain is mostly made out of fat. That's why even though we shouldn't eat too much fat, we have to eat some fat, because it turns out that's what our brains are made out of. All right, here's the last one. Patagonia is the only country in the world where dogs are allowed to own houses. If you think that's true, then you should bark like a dog. Rawr, rawr. No, that one's not true. Patagonia isn't even a country at all. So sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. How did you decide? Whether things sounded like maybe they were real? Maybe you could go to the internet like I did with the kneecaps and look them up, but can you always believe all the things you see on the internet? Sometimes it's really hard to know what's real or what's not real. And we're going to read about a man named Moses who had a really hard time deciding what was real and what was not real. He was out watching his sheep one day, and he saw the craziest thing. He saw a bush that seemed to be on fire. Now, that was not that crazy, because actually, when you're out in the wilderness, things go on fire all the time. But although the bush was on fire, it didn't seem to be burning up. And so Moses went to it really closely to see what was going on, and we went to it really closely. A very strange thing happened. a voice came out of the bush. And it was the voice of the Lord. Let's see what it says. When the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." And then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And at this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So God is sometimes something that's really hard to know whether he's real because we can't really see God. And you notice that Moses isn't exactly seeing God. He's seeing a fire in a bush and he's hearing a voice. But, we often don't see crazy things like that. But how do we know that God is real? Well, how do you know that I'm real? Here I am talking to you in a video, but people can make up videos all the time. It's pretty easy. Some of you have been in my Sunday school class before we had to all be in our houses and not be able to come to church and see each other. And so some of you have heard me and seen me and touched me and, maybe even got a hug from me or something, and you know that I'm real. But some of you maybe you've only ever seen me on a video. How do you even know that I'm real? How do we know that God is real? Well, sometimes God does speak to people in voices like he spoke to Moses, but he doesn't always do that. But sometimes we can hear God's voice speaking to us in other ways. When we hear verses in the Bible, when people talk to us, our parents or our pastors or other people, and we hear a voice, and sometimes we just know deep in our hearts that God is talking to us. But it can be very hard to hear the voice of God and know that he's real. And it was especially hard for Moses because they didn't know a lot about God then. They didn't have the Bible. They didn't have any way to find out about God. So it was hard for Moses to know if God was really real. Well, another way you could know if something is real is you could touch it. But we can't touch God because God isn't the kind of thing that you can touch. But you can work together with God. Sometimes you can see that God is working in things. You can see that God is doing things that couldn't happen any other way except with God. And that's what God wanted Moses to do. God wanted Moses to work with God to do something really important. Let's see what that was. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." So God decided he had to help those people. And how did he do it? He sent a person. He sent Moses. And Moses at first had a really hard time believing that God would even do that. He didn't even want to do it. He didn't think people would believe him. He thought it was not going to work. But eventually it did work. And the people did get out of Egypt and they did get the promised land. So even though they couldn't touch God, what God did in his life, it touched them. And let's talk about seeing things. Moses said that, what if they don't believe me? What if I have to have some way to prove it? And so God did show signs to Moses. He showed him things that he could see to show that God was real. The first thing he showed him, of course, was the bush. Here's a little bitty piece of bush I have here. And now the bush looks like it's on fire, but not burning up, just like Moses' bush. Look at that. And God made some other signs for him too. Moses said, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. And the Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." So Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake and he ran from it. And then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took a hold of the snake, and it turned back to a staff in his hand. So that was something that God gave Moses that he could do. He could turn his staff into a snake and back again whenever he wanted to. Now a staff is a kind of a stick, so is a pencil. I'm going to show you a trick that's a little bit like making a pencil turn into a snake, which you can practice at home if you like, because it's pretty fun. If you hold a pencil just right like this, you have to hold it kind of loose. And you sort of do it up and down. The pencil can kind of look like it's wiggling. It can look like it's wiggling like a snake. Looks like it's wiggling when I look at it. It takes a lot of practice to get good at it, but you can make your pencil look kind of like it's a snake wiggling. It's kind of fun. But that wasn't the only sign that God gave Moses, because Moses didn't think that even was going to work. So the Lord gave him another trick. He said, put your hand inside your clothes. So Moses put his hand in his clothes, and when he took it out, his skin was all covered with a nasty skin disease. Oh my goodness, it was like white, like snow. Now put it back in your clothes, he said. So Moses put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was just fine like the rest of his flesh. And Moses could do that whenever he wanted to, too, in order to show people that that's what God was doing. But he said, I'll give you another sign, too. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it out on the dry ground. And the water from the Nile you pour out will turn into blood. Kind of like that. Well, it's kind of fun to see these things, but you know that they were not really real. I didn't really turn water into blood. In fact, this isn't even blood. This is cranberry juice. I didn't turn my stick into a snake. I didn't really make my bush go on fire. I didn't make my hand have a sickness. I couldn't do any of those things. And in fact, there are tricks to make people do those kinds of things. When Moses went to Pharaoh to show him and did all of those signs, it turned out that Pharaoh's magicians could do all of those things too. They were doing it with sneaky tricks and not doing it the way that by having God's power. But, you know, people can do things that look like that all the time anyway. In the end, it isn't really tricks like that that convince us whether there's God or not. What really convinces us whether there's God or not is whether people's lives are different. When people follow God and then they begin to be able to become the kind of people that God wants them to be, that's when they know that God is really real. When Moses was afraid and he didn't want to do things, and when he became brave and able to do what God wanted him to do, that showed that he was real. When the people couldn't obey God and they couldn't do what God wanted them to do, but then they became able to obey God because God was working in their lives, that actually showed them what they were real. I mean, the fact is we can't really see God. Later on, Moses really wanted to see God. He wanted to see if God was real. And he asked God, can't I just see you? And this is what God said. The Lord said, I will come in all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face. No one can see my face and live. The fact is that God, looking at God is a little bit like looking at the sun. Now you may think, well, I see the sun all the time, but actually you shouldn't look directly at the sun. If you do look directly at the sun, it would burn your eyes out. And God is really much brighter than the sun. If we saw God, it probably would really kill us. When people in the Bible, even when they just see a sign of God, like the burning bush or an angel, they often feel like they're going to die. God doesn't appear to us because he's not the kind of thing that we can see. But if we keep following God and we keep loving and obeying him, eventually God will make us into the kind of people who will be able to see God. And eventually, at the end of all things, we will be able to see God. So let's read one more part of the story about how God spoke to Moses at the burning bush. There was one other thing that Moses thought that the people would want to know. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. So that's an interesting name that God has. I am, or maybe a longer version, I am who I am. That's not a name like Gloria or like Chris that tells you apart from other people. It's not a name that tells God apart from other gods like all the gods Egyptians had. I am means the God who is really there, the God who is really real. So we have to remember there's really only one real God, so real that the only name that he can give us for himself is I am.